Sure.
Very much, because I'm like, oh, we're good.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. So I'm originally from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I did my undergrad at Millersville University, and then got my MFA at Parsons, which I finished last year. So let me just give you like a little bit more context on my work before I share my screen here. Just to kind of like to give kind of like a framework here. Let me get my notes out here. So as I said, I'm originally from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And while Lancaster City itself is like a really progressive, awesome city, the greater Lancaster area is like very, very conservative. And growing up there as a kid, I was always like bullied for my body, and I already felt like an outsider even years before I realized I was queer. And I was even starting to struggle with like depression and anxiety, like even like as early as like the age of 12. So when I started to realize that I was gay, it really devastated me, because I was like, oh great, another thing to be made fun of, another thing to make me feel like an outsider. That's just perfect. So when I started to come out, I had hoped to find this like welcoming queer community where I could feel accepted. But unfortunately, that quite isn't what I found. Queer communities, particularly the cisgender gay male communities, really claim to be welcoming and accepting. But when it comes to accepting disabled or fat or neurodiverse people, they just really fall short. And so when I started making profiles on like gay websites and like dating websites and apps and stuff like that, such as Grindr, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, I started coming across this phrase, no femmes, no fats, just proudly displayed on other users' bios. Sometimes like there would also be like no Asians, no blacks, no, just no, and then just some sort of like identity for someone. And so the bullying and harassment that I was experiencing from my peers in school started to carry over into my peers in the gay community. Like, so for example, despite trying my absolute hardest to use really flattering images of myself for my profiles, I would get like unsolicited messages from guys just like making fun of my body, or even some just like telling me outright just to kill myself. So overall, these experiences put me in a very precarious relationship with myself and my body and my mental health. And my depression and anxiety intensified, and I eventually developed a personality disorder as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Oh, could you enable screen sharing? Still not lit.
I think you're muted, Jane.
Ah, here we go.
Okay, cool. I was saying, isn't that sweater gorgeous? Yeah, it's your sweater, Jesse.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to go back to mute.
Hold on. For some reason, hold on. My computer is like, allow permission for screen sharing, and I thought I had this turned on, but all right, can you see my desktop? Yes, okay. And can you see the photo? Don't see my notes?
Yep, wait, I see the photo.
Okay, good. Okay. So so a few years ago, when I was accepted to grad school and was preparing to move to New York City, I had built up this hope that New York City would be this like queer utopia. But the exclusionary attitudes that I was experiencing back home still remained, especially with like the queer communities being so large in New York City. People can be really cliquey and choose to support only those that they're attracted to. And so this kind of develops into this idea based off of heteronormative. You can kind of take that term and reuse it to say homonormative, which is this like very, what is the norm in particularly like cisgender gay men, how they become like the norm of queer communities, basically. And so I was, this is something that's like really projected onto me and other gay men and other queer people. And the app Grindr is a perfect platform for this toxicity to really thrive. So this photo I took soon after moving to New York City, where I was really frustrated with what was going on here, and how this homonormativity was being projected onto me and into the community at large. And so I took this photo where I have Grindr open on my phone and I have it attached to my face, kind of like haphazardly with like tape and rubber bands. And up until this point, I really never did like self-portraiture. But this was something like I just really did out of like frustration, felt like I had to do. So one like little example about Grindr here is Grindr has filters where you can like remove undesirable people that like just won't, so they just don't even show up on the app for you. So this photo was taken in 2018. So this was 2 years before Grindr finally removed the racial filter, where you could like filter out different races if you wanted to, which is not great. So they finally removed that a little over a year ago. But you can still filter by weight and body type, which probably isn't going away anytime soon. So I continued to explore this, this like frustration I was feeling through self-portraiture in these like studio-like settings where it's tightly framed and there's not really much environment going on. And I was thinking about this, just continuing to think about this projection of these aspects onto me and other queer people. And I was placing different objects and materials on my face. I was thinking about how the face is kind of like a physical representation of our identity, and it is one way that we connect to others. And these objects and materials are interfering or changing this connection with the outside world. And many of these objects and materials I were using are meant to suggest different aspects of sexuality, gender, mental illness, or other related experiences. And I was starting to be drawn to this sense of like absurdity and humor and playfulness and the uncanny. And I didn't want to provide like any specific concrete narrative, no specific storytelling, and just kind of leave it more ambiguous and open to interpretation. After doing that little series of photographing myself for a little bit, I realized I couldn't just photograph myself. It felt too personal and I wanted to broaden it. And so with like including other people in the work and photographing others, I could have other experiences and narratives that could inform the work. And so because of this, my process became very collaborative, which I really, really admired. So when I was working with other people, some photos, like I would have some ideas, sometimes they would have ideas, but more often than not, we would kind of bounce ideas off of each other and just have fun and just do this, engage in this like really playful, collaborative and spontaneous shoot. And I kind of realized that coming together in this way was reflecting this sense of community that I was seeking in queerness. I was also starting to read Disidentifications by Jose Esteban Munoz, who's a queer theorist that describes disidentifications as these survival strategies and practices that queer people of color or other marginalized identities use to navigate majoritarian spaces. So Munoz recognizes that when someone is faced with a dominant ideology, you can either identify with it or you can counter-identify with it. But both of those things are reinforcing that dominant ideology as the dominant ideology. So disidentification seeks to recycle the materials of the dominant ideology to rethink the role of the subject within that space. And so I started to think about like how I could, utilize that in my work And I eventually decided to title this series Disidentifications, named after that idea, which includes some of the self-portraits I made soon after I moved to New York, and then this work that I was continuing to create with others. I still wasn't trying to provide any concrete narratives of disidentifications, like this is how this person disidentifies. And I didn't want to tell these people's stories in a way of like social documentation, but rather I wanted to present an image that kind of reflects this idea of disidentifying. So I was experimenting with subjects interacting with objects and their environment in unusual ways. And in a sense, these objects and interactions are recycled to make new experiences. But also on a more visual level, these images were kind of disidentifying because they aren't really assimilating into pure reality, but not quite a rejection of it either. So for example, this photo, like if you walked in on this, it would be very odd, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's not like supernatural, but it could be something like from a dream or something just like that's weird. Like, did that happen? And this link to reality, but being able to play with the sense of reality is why I'm drawn to photography. It has this this indexicality. So with like painting, for example, you can like completely like fabricate an image, or like digitally, like digital art, where you can just like make something out of nothing. But I really like keeping that foot in the door of reality. Yeah, and lost my spot in my notes here for a second. And so that's why I also use like a traditional visual language of photography, like well lit and composed, keeping like the scene true to life, like how you would see it in real life, without doing any like weird post-production manipulations. So the weirdness is coming from the content of the scene rather than the treatment of the photograph. And that is when I was like starting to think about like the uncanny, or this idea of like the strangely familiar. So after working on this for a couple of months, up until then, I was only photographing in New York City, but I wanted to recognize that New York City isn't the only place where queer people live. And I became familiar with this concept of metronormativity, which is this idea that queer people should live in metropolitan areas in order to be themselves and to be free. And metronormativity looks down on non-urban communities, framing them as undesirable for queer people, unintelligent, toxic. However, queer people may not have the accessibility or even the desire to leave these places. This is like, there's people there that have, a lot of connections. It's their sense of home and family, and they might not necessarily want to leave. So why should they be looked down upon for that? And it can be really damaging to queer people to see their community in that light. So I eventually got a travel grant and went to Wisconsin, Kansas, Missouri, and back home to Pennsylvania to continue making this work. And when I would travel, I would stay for a week or two and briefly become a part of these communities and meet a lot of different queer people to create these photos. One trip in particular, I went to Lawrence, Kansas, and I stayed at this this co-op house that was part of this like larger network of like queer co-op housing. And they had an extra bedroom in this. It was like a 9-bedroom house and had this extra bedroom, and they let me stay there for like 2 weeks. And it was all queer people living there, and even more from the local community would come and go. And so for that time, I was like briefly immersed in this specific community and engage in this collaborative process to work with many of the individuals I met to take these photos. And by like really staying there for this time, we were able to have these spontaneous photo shoots rather than something that was like more rigid and planned. I also realized I started using these like references to childhood, and I started to embrace this and push this a little further because of how it can emphasize this sense of like playfulness and fluidity, and can also recall this idea of like innocence versus sexuality. And I was also thinking of like imagination, role play, performativity, and how they tie into disidentification as well. And also relating it to kitsch and camp, with like the humor, tackiness, exaggeration, and this like repurposing of like everyday objects. And for me, this like repurposing of objects specifically reflects this idea of disidentification, recycling these materials into something else. So after working on disidentifications for about a year, I wanted to experiment with video and performance while I worked on editing down those photos. And there was always this like performative aspect of my work, and I wanted to see what I could do with like a time-based medium in ways that photography couldn't. So I made this this video called Makeup Tutorial in the summer of 2019. I'm gonna play it here. There's no audio or anything, so you don't have to worry about the audio. So I'm gonna keep talking while it plays. I'm gonna let it play for a moment. So I was originally thinking about like these expectations of hyperfemininity or hypermasculinity being projected onto gay people through this like idea of homonormativity. And so I utilized the language of like a makeup tutorial, something that's like really trendy on YouTube or Instagram, and also like making a reference to drag and reimagining it into something else. And also still using like humor and absurdity. And so after that like little brief experimentation with video and performance, I've done that piece as like a live performance. I've done that as a live performance in a couple different times. So after doing that, I wanted to kind of like return to photography. I did some other video work, but I wasn't really feeling it. So in February of 2020, I was in Chicago for the CAA conference, the College Art Association conference. And I stayed in this Airbnb that was like absolutely filled with mirrors. There was like entire walls that were mirrors, and like the bathroom had mirrors on like every surface, so you could see yourself in very vulnerable positions from every angle. And also, as I was in Chicago, you know, there's this giant bean-shaped mirror that in some way also has this like bodily shape, and it's this like huge spectacle, really. So staying here, I was like always seeing myself and faced with myself like at all times when I was in this house. And so that kind of like began to make me think about like what originally made me feel like an outlier among gay men, which was my body. And I started to think about this like role of like corporeality in queerness. And so this was the first photo I took in that Airbnb. I didn't like seeing my body all this time. It was like making me think of like the not good relationship I have with my body. And so like I'm using the edges of the mirror to kind of like cut my body into pieces, and then obscuring my face with like the reflection of those like smudges and touches like all over the mirror. And then I began to think about how this like this reflected self-image can play a role in my relationships with others, particularly as like a neurodiverse gay man. And one thing about like many representations of non-normative bodies in art and visual culture, especially queer art and visual culture, is that it is often predicated on that body's ability to be sexualized. So they'll take like a non-normative body and find some way to adhere it to a traditional standard of beauty and sexualization to basically say see, this body is valid because we can sexualize it. We found a way to sexualize it. So this body and this person, valid. And it's like, well, when we talk about non-normative bodies and it's like through a queer lens, can we do so without sexualizing them? Like, can't we just accept them for the sake of accepting them? And when I was doing research on this, I came across this concept of body neutrality, which is a response to body positivity that has emerged in recent years. That is this acceptance of your body as is, rather than like a love of your body. And it's still a good solution to feelings of disgust or rejection. And body positivity can put like a lot of pressure on people to feel beautiful. Like, you know, it's like, oh yeah, you need to feel like sexy and own the room and amazing and absolute. And it's like, is that the only response to negative feelings in my body? Is it like I either have to hate my body or I have to be this like beautiful, sexy, curvy queen? Like I can't just be like who I am. I can't just be existing. And so that's just like where this concept of body neutrality comes into play. And of course, like body positivity and body neutrality aren't like the only, you know, antidotes to these negative feelings, but they are very useful tools for some people. And so in continuing this series, I wanted to look at different parts of my body and eventually some other people's bodies that aren't necessarily sightly or appealing. I didn't want to show them as gross, but I didn't want to show them as beautiful, just more neutral. I almost wanted it to be like what you would see in an encyclopedia entry, like if you looked up like scar or rash or like a peeling sunburn. It's just like neutral perspective, and it can still be like the photos can still be aesthetically pleasing without commenting on the validity of the person. And so this series, I began to refer to this work, starting with the photos in Chicago in the Airbnb, up and including these, as ad corpus, which is a play on the term ad hominem. Ad hominem means to the person in Latin, and it is this fallacy in an argument where you attack a person rather than their opinion or their viewpoint. So by replacing hominem with corpus, which means body, it's kind of, you know, talking about this like focus on the body instead of the person. So that work, I like I said, I started that in February of 2020, and that carried on a little bit into the pandemic and also recently. But there was also some work I was making when the pandemic started. I was in my last year of grad school, so I finished grad school in August of 2020. So like my last two semesters, so Parsons has like a three, like the photo department, the MFA photo department has summer semesters. So I was in school all from like when the pandemic started all the way through August, working on my thesis, yeah, and everything. And so of course, like my mental health like really took a dive, which I'm sure like many people can relate to. And it really became hard to find the motivation to do anything, you know, let alone make work or work on my thesis paper or anything like that. And also, since I could no longer go out and travel and photograph other people, and you know, since my process is always really playful and collaborative with other people, and I was just like stuck with myself, and I was miserable, and I didn't want to photograph myself. But I did eventually do a little bit of self-portraiture, but I was like, I can't put too much effort into it. Like I'm gonna do, you know, I'm gonna force myself to do work, and it's gonna be low effort photos that are just stupid. So I took this photo, which is you might recognize it. I'm referencing the migrant mother photograph, but it's sitting in my bed with my cat, as low effort as it gets. And then that kind of like jump started this like little series where I was recreating. I mean, this was something like a lot of other people were doing too, but I was kind of doing it. I wasn't taking it seriously. Like there was a lot of like Instagram accounts that were popping up when the pandemic started, where people were recreating like classical works of art and things like that. And I was doing that, but low effort and not caring about it and just doing it, kind of like in a tongue-in-cheek way. So this one is 3 variations on the Madonna and Child classical art theme. And then these low effort self-portraits finally started to develop into something a little further, especially as people started getting vaccinated and things started to open up again. And I was able to, and I was kind of like in this recovery sort of, and was kind of able to, put a little bit more energy into it. And so I continued with some more self-portraiture for obvious reasons. Still not super great to, wasn't until much more recent when it was okay to start seeing a bunch of other people. And then eventually, recently, I have been able to start photographing others again and starting to once again engage in that spontaneous, collaborative, playful process that I really haven't been able to do for a while. And so these photos, starting with those pandemic self-portraits, those low effort self-portraits, and then up to and including some of these photos, are kind of like my current ongoing work. I'm not quite sure where it's going quite yet. I mean, I know that the pandemic deeply affected me. I mean, it affected everyone. And so I'm kind of piecing together and learning how to navigate like our changed world, my changed self, and trying to bring in, more elements that's, are more related to my mental health issues and other things, and how those parts of me that were really took a dive during the pandemic, and how, what that looks like coming out of that. So yeah, that brings me up to now. That's all I have. So thank you for having me and letting me talk at you for a little bit and sharing my work.
Well, let me just let you off the hook yet. I can ask a question or two.
Yes, no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Happy to take questions.
I just didn't want to interrupt you because that was really good talk, Jesse. I was mesmerized the whole time. What I want to ask you is, there was these really interesting spaces in almost all of these photographs. But what I started thinking about was, because there was, especially with the self-portraits, the first body of work, and then these others, are these places that you're choosing specifically for the photograph, or is it a place that you live? Because like, for example, the pink bathroom, that's classic, and I'm looking at like that, you couldn't get any better for that photograph, and I'm just thinking where how the intention played into that, and how much, was there a lot of preparatory work, or were you just going into these places that just happen to have these spaces, and then you were working to build the picture from the space up versus this, you see what I'm saying, the picture of the person?
Yeah, it was mostly that. It was mostly most of these spaces I wasn't familiar with beforehand. But like I said, so I was like traveling a lot and going to like new spaces, and very few of those photos were taken in where I live. And the ones that are taken where I live, I really, cut them in close. And I don't like to include any environment, because I think just being in my own space all the time, I don't really find my own space that inspirational. It's like I'm so used to it, seeing it every day. So, going to different places and seeing these different things just like really get like the creative juices flowing. So it was mostly like, it's, my shoots are always very spontaneous. So it's either like, oh my gosh, we have to make a photo in this bathroom, or we have to make a photo over here, like in this room or here. Or sometimes it's like kind of like having an idea for a photo and thinking like, okay, where's like a good place where we could do this, and just kind of like playing with it. But yeah, very rarely, were any of them really planned. I mean, the most planning some of them would be like, I would meet someone and be like, hey, like I'd love to, make some photos with you. And then, we'd be talking about like where to do it. And they'd be like, oh, actually, like, I know this really cool place that I like to hang out sometimes. Let's go there. Or, they'd be like, oh, I have a really interesting bathroom, or I have a really interesting basement, or something like that. And then we would go and be like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Let's do it. Um, yeah.
I know other people might want to ask, but let me ask another one just in case, because it's what's in my brain.
Mhm.
Talked a lot about your mental health while you were moving through, especially during the pandemic, which to me probably one of the worst. I mean, I know what you mean, like trying to navigate things the right way, so you don't want to jump off a building. That would be my choice of to be like, let's fly for 2 seconds. So, I mean, the whole thing of like doing that, and you said you weren't motivated, but how did you end up addressing so that you did get motivated? Because now here you are on this new work. I mean, like a lot of people, and I think I'm real motivated hopper anyway. So but I know people, especially that really suffer through, and they're still paying the price. I mean, like they're still, it could be ongoing for some time, moving through the mental health issues and created physical health issues, all of that stuff. So my question then, to make it a little bit shorter, I guess, is that what tools were you able to draw into yourself to give you what you needed to continue to make the work so that it could grow to where it is today?
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of like, well, I didn't make work for like a while. Like it was probably a while. And my roommates at the time, I did do some work with them. That was kind of just, that was like, I was really upset that I wasn't making work. And because I was like, this is my thesis year and I should be getting so much stuff done. And it's just like an absolute struggle to get anything done. And it was just getting like increasingly upsetting. But then the thought of having to put in the work to make work was also upsetting. And so that's where I was kind of like, you know what, I'm just gonna make some stuff and I'm not gonna put effort into it. I'm just gonna like do it like those photos where I was like recreating other works of art. Like I literally took them in bed. I was like, I'm gonna not put much effort into it at all. And like photos that some photos that I took of my roommates, I was also just like, I'm not gonna care what it looks like. I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna do it. And that was like probably the best tool to then get me in the motion of like, okay, like reminding myself like, oh yeah, this is what I like to do. This is what feels good. And really trying to focus on that. And then being like, okay, maybe I can put in a little more effort and a little more effort. And it's like, okay, maybe I can leave my apartment, and maybe like there's one photo of me on the roof of my apartment building. And I was like, maybe I can, muster the energy to walk up one flight of stairs and like go outside and take a photo, set up the tripod and everything. And which I'd say, okay, maybe I can, go to a park or something like that. And and then that's kind of, it was just like adding a little bit more effort and a little bit more effort each time.
That's like a one day at a time journey in a way to build the work. So it's a method too. Thank you. Here's a question from Andre, and it says, has your journey through photography affected the relationship with your body? What did you take away from your artistic and academic path?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, I mean, there's definitely something really powerful with kind of like taking ownership of your own representation and like photographing yourself. And yeah, so like for example, in those very first photos I took of myself, which, sorry, to backtrack a little more, in undergrad, anytime I got like a self-portraiture assignment, I was like, how can I do this in the most abstract, weirdest way so I don't actually have to take like like portraits that look like me. So I would like, I remember I had this one portrait assignment that was with like a pinhole camera. And so I did like really close up pieces of like my face. So you couldn't actually like see me at all. And then like pieced it together kind of like a cubist style. And then there was like another one where I did it at night with a handheld flash, and I would like move my body or like shake my head really fast and then use the flash to illuminate myself really briefly and then do like a bunch of multiple exposures. So the end result was just this like blurry mass. So I was like, so I had to, not be able to have like a specific visual representation of myself. But then when I took those photos, it was like really out of that frustration, really out of that anger, I did it. And but it was still like very close. I was like, I can't show anything from like the shoulders down. I was like, absolutely out of the question. And then I think I started just like including more and more, and realized that by, taking photos of myself and taking that control over it, and also having something in the photo that, so it wasn't just about my body, like something else was going on. Like I think the first photo I took of myself that where you can see my full body is the one where it's me and another person, and I have yarn all over my face and they're knitting something from the yarn that's coming off of my face. And I was like, no one's going to care. No one's going to like really be looking at my body or anything like that, because they're going to be so confused about what the hell is going on. Like what's going on here. And the same sort of thing about like the more recent one where it's like me sitting on the bed and I have a light bright with a shape of a penis on it. I was like, what, by just taking this like really ridiculous photo, it just, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I think that also ties into that like feeling of like body neutrality, where it's like, I don't have to feel like, I don't have to be like, oh yeah, I'm this like, super beautiful, sexy person. It's like, I can just like take a weird photo of myself and that's enough.
I think it was kind of, and people might disagree with me on this, I don't know, but when the yarn photo to me really did talk a lot about body neutrality, but it also spoke to me in the sense, in just maybe a little bit different way, of the like bag over your head thing, where you want that neutrality, like one of the things that I would really like about the mask thing is, I really like that I don't have to try to make sure my face is saying the right thing. Do you know what I mean? Like when people are looking at me like I'm not either frowning when I'm not supposed to be, or smiling, like all that stuff. So, I thought about that with the photograph, that it was that feel to me when I was looking at it. It was just another method of talking about it. And it also reflected another, to me, I've seen a painting similar to that with a knitting person, but that in the art sense spoke to me in a sort of a covert way about that. But anyway, I thought about that, and I was wondering if that was accurate or just a way the viewer is looking at your work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely accurate. Like when I made that photo, I was specifically thinking about kind of like in a similar way to the one where there's me and another person in the mirror, and I kind of have them in like something between like a hug and a chokehold, where it's kind of this like relationship between two people. And I was thinking about this like feelings of being on one end either trapped and controlled, or willingly hiding myself. And I kind of wanted it to like leave it open, where it's like, am I a willing participant in that? And am I, happy to be kind of invisible in a sense where you can't see my face and my head is just this ball of yarn and I'm just being used for the yarn? Or is it something that I'm not, consenting to, where it's something that's being like forced upon me? And I wanted to leave that open, because I wasn't even sure how I was feeling about it at the time. And I was specifically thinking about like relationships with like other men I was experiencing like after moving to New York. It's kind of, it's almost kind of like what it felt like dating, like moving after moving to New York.
No, you're not the only, I have a good friend in Brooklyn, Logan. He went through quite a while of that, that isolation. I think that's just true. And I don't know in his situation if, there's a neurodiverse, but I think when you're thinking, this is just my own opinion, but there takes time to navigate the neurotypical world and to translate into pictures what people are thinking sequentially, so that there's a language that can be met in the middle, or there can be this relationship that's more fluid and it doesn't get stuck, in ways that, like, there seems to be this stuckness in communicating, so that, and people aren't always willing to take the time to let someone translate that in a way that's productive and positive, like paint the picture a different way, for example, and so I think that it's important that's what I think about a lot and going through that. And it's lucky as artists, especially neurodiverse artists, I often say that we can, in a pinch, keep good company with ourselves, like your self-portraits, and start to create a path where we can communicate visually with the world, and where we're coming from, and that. So I think that in some ways is a really nice blessing. It's just my thought, but it's where I hold myself to at this point in life. I'm too old to have taken so long, but it's just, late bloomers are always nice. So you got to remember that. But I think that's one thing, that your work is really powerful that way and moving to me emotionally when I see it. And I think that gives it a lot of strength when we have that. So, and I want to just make sure, I know I'm going to get in this whole thing, and I want to keep you but I'm very grateful that you've been here, and I think the work is really beautiful. And it made me think of a lot of different artists too, which I thought was interesting, and some of them were queer artists and some of them were feminist artists, and so there was Jen, I can't remember her last name, but you probably know her work. She went to Yale, and she did all this work on self-portraiture, and I think it was some of her first ideas of self-portraiture and size and the loneliness in that. I gotta remember, I don't know why it slipped me because it's been a bit, but do you know her work?
It sounds familiar. You said, what's the first name?
Her name's Jen, Jen. Yeah, I know her last name's an S name, but I've got her on Facebook. I'll have to look. But
Yeah.
I'll have to message you it, but what was interesting and why I thought of her work, besides she does the work on body image, but also it wasn't just that, except for just some of the picture feel giving thing, but it was the spaces too and the lighting. You guys had very similar, like this really lovely light, but it also had this sort of, like you said, the kitsch satire, like in a lot of playful things. So anyway, some of hers were like that and some of them weren't. That there's sometimes a little lonely feel, but I thought of that, her work. And then another feminist artist I know, Milena Barnhart, do you know her work?
I'm not sure. I might see this in the work. Like, part of my thing is like I'm really bad with names.
Don't even worry, she's a sticker girl. That's why, I mean, like the stickers, I thought, oh my gosh, she used it in a very similar way. And I thought that was such a nice intersection, and her work and looking. So just some thoughts around that. But
Yeah, what was her name again?
Lena Barnhart. And she is also neurodiverse. And she works layers. Listen, we went to grad school together, and I don't know if she ever took a photograph. I am serious. She worked with stickers, and she made all these layers. She may have taken a few, because she teaches photography now at Metro State. She just got that job at Metro State in Denver. Just a lovely, lovely person. But I'm telling you, it was a kind of a funny thing. There was her and her boyfriend ended up being her boyfriend. He didn't take very many photographs either. But they used different mediums, and it was all image making. So it worked out beautifully. But her ton of stickers, it's definitely worth maybe, taking a look at. And she made some really interesting videos too. But anyway, yeah. So, but let me ask, because there's all these students, I'm so glad they're here. Do any of you guys have any questions? I know Andre was a good question. He's saying he went through the same thing too in San Francisco that you're talking about. It's called, there's a name for it, social shunning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I
Yeah.
think it's important to remember that there's a name, and also remember that it's neurodiverse people. We should really all stick together, you know, do a little social shunning of our own, you know.
Yeah.
I have one question real quick. It's not really a question. I think it's just a consideration. I don't know, Jesse, if you know, but Jane is teaching right now a art and activism class. And in our Slack conversations that we've been having, like people have brought several ways in which people can interpret activism, for example, I focus personally on art accessibility and people that cannot physically and mentally access and also financially access art. But there were people that were talking about body positivity and not really body positivity, but like more like bodily acceptance.
Mhm.
The same way that you touched the theme beforehand. Do you think, or have you ever felt like your work could be utilized somehow as an act of activism or as a way to sort of denounce contemporary society and the stereotypes that are inflicted nowadays?
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't think that is like activism isn't like my main goal. I mean, I do hope that it does contribute to some sort of like change, but I'm not trying to make it specifically about activism. Rather, I kind of hope that through just like presenting these ideas, that the activism work will kind of like
Sort of like instigate
if that
some sort of change.
yeah like, but yeah, because like one thing I've always been like cautious about, well, not cautious, but something that I just didn't want to do is I didn't want to like be too preachy or anything like that, because I didn't want to make my work specifically about like, oh, I like this photograph is going to change the world. I think I'm also kind of like a little bit of like a realist in that, when it's like, where it's like, yeah, absolutely, I would love for my work to contribute to this changing world and contribute to, I mean, definitely that's part of what my intent is. But but yeah, I just don't, think like, oh yeah, I'm going to change the world with this work, because I'm just, I'm one person.
Well, but the work is conceptual, so it gives, I mean, I think one thing, here comes, I'll read this question too. One thing that's nice is that it's all about access, and that's what Andre's talking about. And and actually, Andre, just I'll make it quick, but I'm just gonna say this: the kitsch idea. What's the painter? He's made a gazillion dollars on painting the little cabins. What's that? Kincaid. That's kitsch too.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, that I find that there's a good conversation in kitsch, because classic kitsch is accessible. I mean, there's no doubt. If you think about Kincaid, you can buy a mug, a calendar, a sticker, I don't know, a gazelle, and Ansel Adams too in photography. So, and he's not kitsch, but it's still very, very commercial, and so it's a thought, that I love that conversation. I'm going to go to Robert's, but I really love the idea of thinking about accessibility and the whole fine art. Come on, we're not going to lie here. do you see any, what kind of people are going to the museum, and where does every artist want their work? Not every artist, but many artists, including myself, although I like to show and social practices just as much. But there's always this like idea of, if we make it to the museum or the certain centers, you know, we're going to show our work, then then somehow we're better than we ever were in the beginning, where our passions are. I mean, you know, there's this definition in fine art, just like everything, you know, that. So the idea of accessibility is a very good thing to think about in art, I think. So, but anyway, let me read Robert's question. Is he showed up late, but we saw he was very quiet, so we just barely noticed. And he says he showed up late and saw the photograph of two people, and one of them with yarn on his head. And you were correct, because when I first saw it, I had to stop and actually look at the image and wondered what was going on. A few seconds later, I thought it was quite stimulating. I have a question about your interaction with the queer gay people that lived in the 9-bedroom house. Were you able to fit in and interact with them to take the spontaneous photographs without difficulty? The images you showed are great and make you think. Now he's saying, is this intuitive approach? Was it just I think what he's saying is that, was it simply super simple for you, or was there a lot of planning and stuff on your part and things? But however, if that, hopefully I read it right too, so he could.
Yeah, I mean, specifically with those people with the 9-bedroom house, it was in a small town. It was in Lawrence, Kansas, so it was just like small town in the middle of Kansas, and I think the largest city was Kansas City, like maybe like an hour or two away or something like that. And since it was like a small area, the queer community had to like stick together, no matter who they were. Like whereas here, like in New York City, because there's so many people, like I mentioned, like you can, you know, the queer communities can choose to only support those that they're attracted to. But when you're in a small town and the queer community is just like a handful of people, if you don't accept everyone in the queer community as they are and stick together, you have no queer community. And so it's like, it was so great. They were so incredibly welcoming and so willing to be photographed. So yeah, I didn't really have too many problems, especially, I mean, it was like a little weird, but it was also since they had like this extra room, and it was just like co-op housing, and they were letting me stay there for 2 weeks. Like I was like living there. So that was one thing I was like really appreciating about like what I was doing when I was traveling, was really spending a lot of time with these people, instead of, you know, like I could have well, like if I stayed at like a hotel or something, which I wouldn't have because I couldn't afford it, but like if I was like staying at a hotel and then I just like scheduled these shoots, and then I'm like, okay, we're gonna meet at, you know, Thursday 2 p.m. I'm gonna come over, we're gonna take some photos, and I'm gonna leave. And it's like I'm not really getting to know the people. But there, like I would say maybe the first week I didn't take nearly as many photos as I took in the second week, because the first week it was just like, you know, as cheesy it is, like making new friends, you know, like I was living with these people and you know, and eating dinner with them, at the, you know, cooking with them, watching TV with them, you know, going out drinking with them, and instead of just shooting them. And I think that would really helped. And I tried to, you know, like I carry that on to a lot of the, like my other shoots as well. When I travel, I just try to like meet people and get to know people, which is honestly like really hard for me, like especially with my social anxiety and things like that. But there's also something nice about like traveling to do it, is like it's kind of like this like other world, and I'm able to kind of like let loose a little bit, and it's like thing, it feels like it doesn't matter as much. Like if I travel somewhere else and I totally screw things up and I make a huge embarrassment of myself, or if I, you know, I can just leave. It's like, it's not like I live there or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think that really that kind of helped give me like a sense of comfort. And obviously that never happened, but and so it just makes it you know, it makes it easier, and yeah, yeah.
I agree that on two levels. One is the relationship is going to make the strong portrait. It really is. There needs to be that visual level of language, right, going on. And I'll finish it. And then the other is that, yeah, it's like going in the grocery store and telling someone your life story and leaving. It kind of refreshing. You know what I mean? Like you just like check her, they're like, huh? And you're like telling them all this shit. And then you leave, you never see them again in like another town. It's sort of fun. Like you just sort of get this little opportunity to go tell them everything. So I like that the thought that you're talking about where you go in and you have this experience, but it's going to be over. And if you can choose to see them again or choose not to see them again, that's the thing.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like it's never happened to me where I had to choose not to see him again. It was just knowing that I had that option was able to like make it more comfortable, but I never had to, I never had to leave really quickly or because I felt uncomfortable or anything like that.
Well, it sounds like, the images certainly show comfortable. They're really talking about relationships. So he's finishing, he's saying, was that your intent to travel to Lawrence and to photograph? Yes. So he missed the part where you talked about the rural areas for life. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I went to Lawrence, Kansas, specifically to make photos, but I didn't know most of the people. How it happened was someone that was in school with me in the cohort above me. I was telling her about my work and she was like, oh, I have this friend of a friend that lives in this like really cool co-op, this queer co-op down in Kansas. That totally sounds like something like you should check out. And then the only interaction I had before going down there was via Facebook messages with like one or two of the people that were just to set up like, to set up like the dates and the room I was staying and stuff like that. And then, so like, it was a mix between really getting to know these people and then like spontaneous shoots. So like I said, it wasn't like I was meeting these people ahead of time. So it's like, yeah, so my intention was to go down there to photograph people. I just didn't know who I was going to photograph. I just knew that there was a house of a bunch of queer people and there was a great like thriving queer community, but I didn't have like a list of names. I didn't know anything about them. And yeah, so yeah.
So but that's what makes the project really interesting and kind of exciting is to take it. And the fact that you had a travel grant. So Robert, and I think you might have missed this part too. Basically, he applied for a travel grant. And was that through your university, Jesse? Or
yes. Yeah.
A lot of them in grad school, sometimes you can compete for them and get them if the work is, in ASU, it's going to be pretty conceptual and, and really your work is activist related. I don't know how you get past saying that because you're talking about isolation and categorizing people and body type, and that's one of the biggest prejudice walking around in this country is, body type. And one of the ways people don't get actual adjudication justice, for issues that go on around a person's body type that are pretty harmful, that so those are activists, I think, two, ways in which you're talking, like you're talking about visually. So that's how I think you may disagree, Jesse, and certainly shut me down if not, but that's how to get those grants a lot of times is to be able to be talking about concept and where you want to move through. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and so like, and while I don't like specifically refer to it as activism, oh my God, oh, that's a cute dog. I definitely see it as like offering like a counter narrative and stuff like that. And I do like when I apply for grants, I do specifically mention how I am seeking to photograph specific types of people that aren't usually photographed in a specific way. And when they are photographed, it's usually not in the best way. And so like I think, yeah, it's definitely like activists in that way. And also to kind of like tie back into the Lawrence, Kansas question, something that is and also activism is how when I talked about like metronormativity, how I was seeking to like why I applied for those travel grants is because I wanted to make work outside of New York City. Because I was like, New York City isn't the only place, like big cities aren't the only place where queer people and different identities of people live. Like they're all over, and they're usually not recognized in like urban area. I mean, in like suburban and rural areas. Oh, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry about that. The dog, I was trying to get her, but I noticed Andre's dog being a lot more polite than my dog is. Look, Jesse, here I've kept you even longer. Did your,
Okay.
last questions for this guest, because we just have him here, and I know you'll take just one more minute. Otherwise, I'm going to shut us down on time, which is a nice thing too. But Jesse, I don't see anybody raising their hand or jumping on here. So I want to say that I am truly grateful, and that was a very moving talk. It really kept me completely interested in everything you had to say. You just delivered it beautifully. So thank you for that so much. Thank you for giving us your time, and all the way over there in New York. So it must be past your dinner time by now.
It's 7:30, not too bad.
And Logan, I usually like to go more often than we had. We had the pandemic, and I was supposed to go in July, and then of course it stopped back up again. Now but the next time I go visit Logan and he teaches at ASU2, I'm going to call you if you're available so we can have a coffee or something, because
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm just got my booster. And I love masks if I need one. So anyway, I would love to do that. And again, I'm very grateful that you came to our class.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely. I'm always happy to share my work.
Well, if we're all good to say goodnight, and you guys come back to see me sometimes too, I'm going to put a link out because I want them to help me on my social media for students. So anyway, you take good care, Jesse. We sure do love meeting you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Let me get.
Hi, Jay.
Hi. Hey, so you guys think about this. If any of you are in the Phoenix area and because I don't have access to that